You know, just a few days ago, I got together with some friends and we rewatched The Flash. And I had a conversation after the movie about what a complete mess the DCEU is and how now with James Gunn coming in and all the changes, does The Flash really matter? And unfortunately, because of the timing of all of this, it's not the last movie I question that with. Obviously, Aquaman 2 is coming out later this year. But before then, we have Blue Beetle. And Blue Beetle's an interesting entry into the DCEU because it's not one that I even thought was going to come out prior to Aquaman 2 because Aquaman 2's been done for a couple of years now, but it's out. And the best thing to do going into this movie, first and foremost, welcome to my non spoiler review. But the best thing to do going into this movie is try not to think about how it fits into the DCEU because doing that will only either piss you off, annoy you, confuse you. It's not going to be positive feelings. You know, before we get into the story of the movie, in this movie, Superman, Batman, and The Flash are all named like they exist in the universe. And that works, except for James Gunn, I believe, said that this movie will be the first one in the new DCU universe that he's creating, but he's also rebooting Superman. So if that's the case, how can there already be a Superman unless that movie takes place before this one? These are all valid questions that we've all been asking, but can you imagine how confused the average moviegoer is going into these movies? Let's talk about Blue Beetle. The movie's directed by Angel Manuel Soto. The movie is very much, it's very Hispanic. And I don't think they're doing this to, I mean, maybe they are, it's a corporation, for diversity's sake. I actually felt like with this film, the Mexican and Latino flair to this movie is very respectful. It did not come off at all like it was forced or it didn't come off like it was pandering. And I respected that, at least about this movie. The thing about this film is this, that I like the movie. I did enjoy the movie. However, there are things about this movie you should know about before you go see it. First of all, like I've said before, superhero burnout is a thing. And if you're burnt out on these kinds of movies, you might not like this one, or you might like it, but you might not want to go see it. See, the thing is, this film takes aspects, like if you were to ask me to compare it to other movies, imagine like Iron Man 1 mixed with Shazam mixed with Venom. That's kind of what you're getting here with Blue Beetle. You know, and that's the character of Blue Beetle, who I am not an expert in. I've never read a Blue Beetle comic in my life, so I don't know anything about the character. So if you're curious about whether or not I know if they're going to screw this up based on the comics, I don't know. But that's the vibe you're going to get from this film. There are some things about the movie that I enjoyed. The respectful portrayal of Mexicans I thought was great. I enjoyed the family aspect of the movie because really the film is basically about the Reyes family. Jamie Reyes is the main character who becomes the Blue Beetle, and the Reyes family's down on their luck. They're about to lose their home because they can't afford it. They're lacking in money, and they're kind of, lost in this world of capitalism. And as expected, the family gets caught up in a situation, a drama that is far and away beyond anything they even knew about. And that will, of course, lead to Jamie eventually becoming the Blue Beetle and becoming a superhero. We've seen this story told time and time again, over and over again. So again, I want to repeat, if you are burnt out on superheroes, this might not be the movie for you. It might not be. The plot is a very basic plot, although it is effective. The characters are fun characters, likable characters. You know, the villains are bad, the good guys are lovable. So it does execute the characters well, but the plot is very predictable. If you've seen a lot of DC and Marvel movies, you're going to be able to predict most of what's going to happen beat by beat. You know, it really is predictable. The comedy in the film, it depends because comedy is very subjective. Some of the comedy I thought was really clever. Some of it, though, was cringe. There's a couple of scenes with Jamie's grandma, the grandmother, the matriarch of the family, that are like so cartoonish. Even though I sometimes appreciate things like this, I know a lot of you are not going to like it. There's some stuff with the grandmother where you're just like rolling your eyes. You know what I'm saying? as far as things being, unrealistic and not believable. When you watch a movie like this, you have to suspend your disbelief and know it's fiction, especially science fiction, which is what most of this film is. But there are things that even go beyond that. And the movie does have a couple of scenes, not a lot, but a couple of scenes that I thought were just a little bit. The comedy didn't hit. It didn't hit for me. However, the one thing the movie does have going for it, besides the fact that Blue Beetle is a very cool character, cool powers, cool abilities, special effects are pretty good. The music is pretty good. I do want to give a shout out to Bobby Krillick. I think it's Krillick how you pronounce his name. He is the known as the Haxon Cloak. He's the guy who made the soundtrack for this one. Very much Iron Man vibes. But the one thing the movie has going for it is it has a ton of heart. This family loves each other. They're with each other through tragedy and triumphs, and ultimately they need each other. The one thing I liked about this movie is it didn't become a situation where in a lot of these movies there's a family problem. I was thinking, okay, well, Jamie's gonna get into a fight with his relatives and go away, and then he's gonna have to come back to save them. They didn't do that in this movie. I was so happy about that. They didn't do that trope. Instead, the family is united, and there are times where they question themselves and question whether or not they have the bravery and the skill to overcome their obstacles, but ultimately they stick together and work together and love each other. There's very little in this movie where there's conflict in the family, except for the conflict with the outside world. And if you know anything about Hispanic families and cultures that are collectivist culture families, they are very strongly bonded. You're not going to get that much conflict. You're going to get some because you always fight with your brothers and sisters and your mom and dad. But in this movie, it wasn't like a big plot thread. That's not what's going on here. They all cared for each other. They all they all loved each other. So by the end of the film, because I do think the strongest part of this movie is the third act. I really liked how they executed that third act. I had a good time watching it, and there's a ton of emotion and a ton of heart. Fathers and sons and mothers and grandmothers and brother and sister, all those connections and even romance is all brought together really well. The script really did focus on emotion and love, and that is something a lot of these movies do tend to miss because they feel so. A lot of these movies, man, they feel so commercialized, like a conveyor belt of films. This one, while it had a lot of the same tropes, a lot of the same visuals as Iron Man, Venom, and like I mentioned, Shazam, those three movies are the three closest comparisons combined together, it had more heart than any of those, including Iron Man 1. I love Iron Man 1, but this movie had, to me, just much more emotion behind it because of the family bond. And it could be because I'm Hispanic and thus I can relate to this. Maybe that's why it connected with me. But I'm sure many of you out there, whether you're Italian, whether you're Indian, whatever your ethnicity is, not all of you, but some of you guys are going to understand the power of the family unit. And that was, to me, the real strong through point of the script, I felt. When it comes to the other side, the villains, Susan Sarandon plays the main villain of this movie, Victoria Cord, and she's basically a cartoon character. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. She's a power and money driven. Yeah, tell me if this sounds familiar. A power and money driven narcissist who cares more about lining their own pockets than they do anybody else, and someone who is cold and doesn't care about hurting anybody or killing anybody as long as they get what they want. That's pretty much her character. She's just a regular human, but she's like Lex Luthor in that aspect, Now, performance-wise, she's fine. I don't think she was bad, even though there's a couple of scenes where she definitely phones it in. Like, there's no question. This is a woman who's been in a lot of classic films. Dead Man Walking, The Last of the Bells, A World Apart, which is a soap opera. She's in a movie Joe. She's been in a ton of movies. She has a lot of experience. Lots of experience. She's been acting since the late 60s, I think. Maybe the early 70s. So she's been around. And she's not even, it doesn't feel like she's even having that much fun here. It's almost just like a paycheck for her. But there are a couple scenes that, she's not bad, but there are a couple scenes where you can tell she's kind of phoning it in. And to me, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. The other villain, not really much there. Raul Max Trujillo plays Conrad Carapax, a.k.a. Omac. and this character is literally just the basically the brawn. If Victoria Court is the brain, she's the brawn. He's her bodyguard. So he's going to be the guy that gets physical with Blue Beetle that he has to fight with. But it's pretty cool because he does have an arc and he does have a really interesting and tragic backstory. So I'm glad that they gave that story some focus, but it wasn't the whole movie about him. They gave it just enough to where you do feel for the character and you do understand why he makes decisions that the choices he does, especially at the end of the movie. So it's tough for me to really review this movie because I feel like so many movies now are so much like this. It's the copy paste formula that we see over and over and over again with these movies. But this one did have heart. It did have a focus on Hispanic culture. There's lots of Easter eggs to Latino culture. I mean, tons. And so there are positives. It's not a bad movie. I'm going to tell you right now, it is not a bad movie at all. But my job is to tell you whether or not you should spend your hard-earned money on this one. And if you have like an AMC Stubs pass and you're going to the movies anyways, go ahead and go. It's a fun little date movie, family movie. You know, if you're Mexican or Puerto Rican or Cuban, you know, even if you're not, you'll appreciate the family aspect of it. You will. If you're kind of, you know, a little bit uneasy, if you kind of are saving money for a bigger movie, or if the budget's tight this month, it might be worth just waiting for the digital copy. It's really not a bad movie. It's just there are so many movies like it now, and people are so burnt out on this type of film that it's same thing with Shazam too, man. It's just the wrong time. This is the wrong time for Blue Beetle. If this exact same movie came out back in 2008 before Iron Man 1 did, we would be talking about this one as almost being not legendary, but a trendsetter. But it's just not a trendsetter. It just does the same thing every other movie does. And even with the heart, some of you guys might not appreciate it. So I really do hope that this review, I hope that when you get done hearing this, you'll kind of get where I'm coming from. Not a bad movie, but if you are tight with your money, I'm just being real with you. And if you want to save it for a better, more must-see film, then that's fair. That's totally fair, and I understand it. I'm sure it'll be on Max at some point by the end of the year. It is worth a watch. It's not one that I'm dying to see right away, but it is worth maybe a watch or two with some friends. That's it. Take care, y'all, and I'll see you in the next review. Love you guys.